All right. Hello, everyone, and welcome to day 2 of the preseason challenge. I'm Christina Anderson, pediatric adolescent registered dietitian, sports nutritionist. And today we're going to talk about why your gymnast may be so tired, sore, and injured all the time, right? They may not have all 3 of these things going on at once, but I would say, part of the journey through this sport, we will incur some fatigue, some soreness, but the real linchpin is it manageable, right? How much is it? How much is too much? And I think most gymnasts have no idea how much better they could feel or how much faster they could recover if their nutrition was where it needed to be. So this really brings us to the topic for today, which is called the recovery gap. And some of you have heard me talk about this before, but this is essentially a way to say if a gymnast needs this much nutrition day in, day out, and she's only getting this much, it doesn't matter how healthy it is. It doesn't matter the timing. It doesn't matter your strategy because there is a gap. She is in a deficit. She day in, day out is not getting enough nutrition to repair, recover, support normal growth and development, which as we talked yesterday is very different than, looking at an adult and their nutrition needs. And then if we don't have enough to support all of that, we don't have enough nutrition to support that adaptation to training or getting better, stronger from our training. And while I say she all the time, just because that's kind of my default, this affects males and females equally. So just want to throw that out there. So yesterday, your homework was to do the preseason fueling audit. You may have taken that quiz on your own as a parent on behalf of your gymnast. You hopefully had your gymnast take it themselves if they were kind of 12, 13 and older. If they were younger, like I said, you can use your discretion or even do it together. And you would have gotten one of 3 results. Now, this is not super scientific. While yes, these questions are based on things that we ask, kind of screening questions for issues with nutrition under fueling. This is just to give you a good idea of where your gymnast might be when it comes to her current fueling patterns. So I want to take a deeper dive into each of these 3 results and what this could mean for your gymnast and kind of where your head needs to be and what you're thinking about on this stage of their journey. So if you scored you're on the right track, your gymnast might be younger. She might be compulsory. She might be like lower level Excel and everything seems fine. She's training, she's healthy, she loves the sport, you feed her, she likes a wide variety of food. Or maybe, she's healthy and not sore or tired, but she's a picky eater. And that's something you want some support with. Or you may have an older upper level gymnast that, knock on wood, to this point hasn't been injured. And maybe she doesn't share with you that she's tired or she's sore or whatever, but that doesn't mean her nutrition is fully optimized as best as it can, right? And that in my mind is something that you can use to separate your gymnast from the competition. When it comes to upper level optionals and level 10 and everyone's trying to get recruited from colleges, it's not good enough to just land the Yurchenko full, right? We need to see dynamics in that vault. We need to see height off the table. And it's those things that will come from optimized nutrition and thus power and strength development that can be the difference of a couple tenths that really could be the difference for your kid trying to get noticed, make it to regionals, make it to nationals, and get recruited and feel valuable to a college team. I would say if you scored this, it would be unfair for us to assume that everything is fine. And that's why I gave this a yellow flag. It would be remiss of me to say, green flag, everything's fine, check nutrition off the box, you're good to go. Because number one, your gymnast nutrition needs are going to change over the next couple years. Things that are relevant right now may not be as so in the future, but then other issues will come into play. So while so much of this is going to be geared towards, upper level gymnasts and current struggles they're experiencing, at the same time, if you're not experiencing those struggles, I want you to tuck away this information in the back of your head because at some point it may come up and it might be sooner than you need it. Focusing on preventive nutrition is going to save you so much heartache, so much lost time. And if we're going to be really honest, it's going to save you a lot of money. If your gymnast has had a major injury yet, you know that the expenses can add up really quickly. Even if you have awesome insurance coverage, you often have copays and cost shares with doctor's visits. You have to take time off as a parent to take them to said doctor's appointments, which time is money, 100%. Oftentimes, when you're trying to find physical therapists or people to take care of the injuries and help them recover, not only are they having to go 2 to 3 times a week, but at some point you may run out of visits. So now you're having to pay out of pocket, or in order to have the best of the best, they may not even take insurance at all. So while again, we can't prevent all injuries, and injuries will happen probably at some point, helping optimize nutrition and giving them the strongest foundation we can on the onset is going to help prevent and help them to recover faster. I have a good story. I had a level 10 I was working with this whole last spring, and she's so talented. She's so strong. She's mentally, physically tough. And right after regionals, she landed a bar dismount and tore like 2.5 tendons in her ankle. And mind you, this is like 2 weeks before nationals. She was slated to do really well. It was a big year for her in terms of recruiting. And when her mom emailed me, I was like, oh my gosh, like, here we go. She's going to miss nationals, which, is not unrecoverable, but it was going to be a really big hit to her goals. And because she had been fueling properly for months and months and months, and had the big rocks of nutrition in place, I could then add targeted supplements and strategies that at least could give her her best shot of healing as quickly as possible. And like 2 or 3 weeks later, homegirl is competing at nationals, competed all 4 events, got like 4th place all around, got to go to the national invite camp at, National Training Center. And I was shocked. I was literally floored that things could heal that quickly. Now, it wasn't healed perfectly, and she still had to do some more healing after nationals. But that being said, I mean, she competes like a double layout. We do a full in, like we throw some huge skills that if, anyone else had torn that many tendons in their ankle, like they would not have even competed floor, much less thrown those kinds of skills. And it was safe. Like, it wasn't like, oh my gosh, you see that she's in horrible pain, this is, going to be super dangerous. Like, no, they made, very calculated decisions. And I really do believe that because she had been fueling properly for months and months and months, she had this just incredible kind of shortened timeline to where she could still compete. And that right there is priceless. So if you scored you're on the slippery slope of fueling issues, I would give this a red flag. And I don't mean to scare you, and I don't want you to feel like you're a failure or that you've done something horribly wrong. Like we talked yesterday, it's really unfair. You don't get told as parents or gymnasts or even coaches how to fuel the gymnasts and what they need. So at this point, your gymnast could have scored this because maybe they have excessive food and body worries that are getting in the way of them adequately fueling their training and their performance and their recovery. And this may be something that you have no idea about. Food and body struggles are often something that are very secretive because there's just so much guilt and shame around them. Especially if you have an older gymnast that's gone through puberty, this just needs to be something in the back of your mind that could be at play. Or they could just be engaging in what I call unintentional underfueling, which is probably the majority, where there aren't concerns with food and body. They have a healthy relationship with food. They're just simply not eating enough. And there's a lot of reasons that this could occur. The bottom line is that whether this underfueling is intentional or not, this is going to lead to something called RED-S, or relative energy deficiency in sport. And this has got to be addressed by a dietitian. If there are food and body struggles getting in the way, definitely a therapist. You want to check in with your medical doctor. And it's really adequate nutrition that's going to help heal and recover in this situation. Or you may have scored poor recovery, which this is just like we're talking today, where your gymnast just isn't closing the recovery gap. Maybe they don't have any major injuries. Maybe they don't think they're that tired or that sore. But again, you never know until you finally give your body what it needs in terms of nutrition. We could sit here for days talking about gymnasts I've worked with that, from the outside, it seems like they're doing really well, right? They make it through assignments, they make it through their conditioning, they're kind of slowly progressing at their own pace. And, from a parent and coach's perspective, like, you're happy, everything seems fine. And yet all of a sudden, at some point they may just get super tired or super sore and they're not keeping up with their teammates anymore, or they hit their growth spurt and they go through puberty. And all of a sudden you're like, this is not even the same gymnast. Like, she's not progressing at the rate that she used to. She's, slow, she's sluggish. Like I watch her run down the vault runway and it's like she's running through quicksand. And when you talk to the gymnast, she's like, I am literally trying my hardest. Like, don't yell at me to run faster because I am literally running as fast as I can, but it's not good enough, right? Like it's not good enough to have enough speed to get off the table or to make the flip or the series or the release move or whatever. And so this is what I would also give a red flag, because even though, we may not have food and body struggles, we may not have, a stress fracture or some sort of acute injury, because of underfueling, your gymnast is missing out on progress that she could be making in the gym without any more effort, right? I am not a lazy person. I don't think any gymnast is lazy. But if there's something I can do to make my life easier, to make it hurt less, to make the suffering be less, to expedite my results, I'm going to do it. And unfortunately, I didn't understand that as a gymnast, and I didn't connect the dots between my underfueling, no matter how healthy it was, and why I was exhausted after, warm-ups and basics, why I felt like I was kind of plateaued in my training and just not getting better. So this one's really tricky because most gymnasts, especially upper level gymnasts, are underfueling. They're all underfueling. So if you ask your gymnast, like, well, how are you doing compared to your teammates? Like, do you, is your endurance as good as them? Like when everyone's putting floor routines together, are you keeping up with them? They may say yes, because that just might be the status quo. Often what we see when we help athletes learn to fuel properly, they will run circles around their teammates because they actually have enough energy. Like I had a parent tell me in our group program the other day that it was like a Friday. So it was after a full week of training, a long, hard week of training. And as they're conditioning, all of her daughter's level 9 and 10 teammates were just dying, trying to get through it and so tired. And her gymnast is like doing leaps and turns and jumps between conditioning turns just because she could, because she wanted to. And that would never have happened if she wasn't properly fueled. I have other gymnasts that I love this. I love when they get to put floor routines together, probably in the next couple months. And it's that first floor routine, right? Every gymnast dreads it. They know it's going to be horrible. They're like praying and hoping they make it on that second and third pass. And when gymnasts fuel properly, that first floor routine is not bad. In fact, I've had coaches literally look at our gymnasts and be like, what are you doing? Like, what is wrong with you? How are you not like doubled over like all your teammates and you can't even catch your breath? Like you just did your first full floor routine of the year and you're fine. Like what's up? And what's up is their nutrition. Like literally it is increased and it is providing their body the building blocks and tools it needs. So regardless of what you scored on the preseason fueling audit, I think we all have things to learn and to think about and to improve. So let's talk about why your gymnast might be tired all the time. Number one, and probably the most obvious, is not enough sleep. And again, while that's not 100% related to nutrition, it is, because your gymnast needs like 8 to 9 plus hours of sleep. During sleep is when their body does a lot of the motor learning. A lot of the learning that they do during school is kind of solidified at night. During that third level of REM sleep is when a lot of the muscle repair and recovery happens. And sleep has a lot to do with appetite regulation. And so, I know a ton of upper level gymnasts that get 4-6 hours of sleep a night, and they're shooting themselves in the foot. And I think especially as a parent, like this is where you can put your foot down and say, like phones go downstairs, not in the bedroom. Like you can have a normal alarm clock, like you're going to bed at this time. You sometimes really need to put some boundaries in place, especially because of just today's landscape with social media and TikTok and Instagram. Like it's so easy to just, scroll for hours, and you meant to go to bed at 10 and all of a sudden it's midnight and now you're like, crap, I have 5 hours to sleep before I have to wake up. So I'm a big stickler for this because, like I said yesterday, all gymnasts train, all gymnasts condition. A lot of you guys pay for massage and chiropractic and mental training and all this other stuff. But if you're doing all of that and your gymnast is getting 6 hours of sleep a night, she's not getting what she needs. Now, I do know that a lot of you have very difficult schedules, and you may have long commutes to and from gym or from gym to school. And for some of you, like best case scenario, like 7 hours is all your gymnast can get, like literally based on what time you get home, trying to shower, go to bed and then having to wake up and do it all over again. I would like to say, you know what, that's okay. You're doing your best, but 7 hours is just not enough. Like, it's not going to cut it. So if it were me and I had like a 12, 13, 14-year-old gymnast who was trying to go elite or trying to get that college scholarship, we would do something in order to help make sure that they can get at least 8 hours, like at least 8 hours. We know from the research that, even if your gymnast only needs 8 hours a night, 9 is often optimal for athletes. But maybe that's, leaving practice early, or, obviously it's probably too late right now, but working with school to get like off-campus PE or, some sort of like elective leave. It's really that important that it at least warrants a conversation and kind of putting heads together and really looking at the schedule and the inefficiencies and seeing what you can do to really expedite getting in bed. The second reason that gymnasts are so tired all the time would be underfueling. And it's literally just the recovery gap. And, physically, mentally, if the body's not getting enough nutrition, your brain's going to go on like low power mode. I think for a lot of us, that like 3 or 4 o'clock slump in the afternoon is often just from not enough nutrition, especially during the day. And when we think about something like breakfast, we often see the effects of skipping breakfast or an inadequate breakfast. Not necessarily at lunch, but more so in the afternoon. And you may be super tired, you may be craving all the things. And so that's obviously a big thing that we need to address, is just adequate fueling. And then the third reason your gymnast could be so tired all the time would actually be some sort of medical reason. So with all the gymnasts that we work with, we recommend at least yearly an iron panel and a vitamin D lab be checked. Both of those, if insufficient or deficient, will cause symptoms of fatigue and poor endurance and poor adaptation to training. There are certain ranges for these labs that are very specific to athletes, that even if your doctor checks these labs, they may say that they're normal just because they're in the normal range, but that doesn't mean that those values are where they need to be optimally for an athlete. So in my mind, address sleep, address adequate overall fueling, and then let's check some very proven kind of standard of care labs. And those 3 things can make an incredible difference in how your gymnast feels, not just in the gym, but at school, in life, right? I mean, we all care so much about gymnastics, but they also need to have good grades, and they also need to be like pleasant to be around, right? You're probably annoyed when on their one day off, like you want to go spend some mom and daughter time together and go shopping or go do something, and all they want to do is sleep until 2 o'clock. Like, that's not normal. Just because they're a teenager doesn't mean that it's normal to sleep hours and hours and hours. And you also can't catch up on sleep on the weekends. Like, you can't just sleep 4 hours or 6 hours a night and then try to sleep, 12 or 16 hours every weekend day. Like, it doesn't work like that. So it really has to be something that is consistent. Why is your gymnast sore all the time? So this one is really interesting to me, and more in the last year have I seen the effects of underfueling exacerbate the soreness from just day in, day out training. And a lot of gymnasts, you'll ask, they'll say, well, I'm only sore if the conditioning changes, or I'm only sore, from that transition of summer schedule to fall schedule where, our numbers are different, things are different. But there's a difference between like gymnast sore, when they're finally sore enough to tell you something about it, versus the everyday just kind of nagging aches and pains that a lot of gymnasts just accept as normal. And obviously, horrendous soreness that limits our ability to perform the next day, like that is too much. And whether we were overtrained or pushed too far or underfueled and underhydrated. And so the body like literally does not have enough building blocks to try to repair all of that damage from the overreaching, which was needed, right? That's how we adapt to our training. I'm really talking about helping gymnasts feel good in their bodies, because if you're here and you're the parent of a level 9 or 10 gymnast, you know that it gets old, that at some point your gymnast has maybe talked about quitting, or, the days are long and sometimes she just gets tired and burnt out. And a big part of helping our gymnasts with that longevity piece in the sport is helping them feel good in their bodies, right? You all know what that's like. If you don't feel good day in and day out, that affects your whole body. It affects your mood. It affects your affect. And for gymnasts, when we can improve their nutrition to help them feel strong, to help them feel energized, to help them feel good in their bodies, that's actually a big way that we can help them reconnect and find their love for the sport again. I tell gymnasts this all the time, like, I want you to call the shots. When you want to be done with the sport, I want you to call that and not your body. And again, injuries happen, accidental injuries happen, things happen that the most perfect nutrition could not have prevented, but it's at least something that is somewhat in our control that we at least can help and try to optimize it as best as we can. And I see parents make a really big mistake with this. They often have researched tons of supplements and, they take them to the chiropractor and they do massage therapy, and all of that won't be nearly as effective if we're underfueled. And I work with a lot of high level gymnasts who they have weekly massage, like they just have a lot of things that they need to do to kind of keep their body in tip top shape. And I've talked to some of their massage therapists before, and it's really interesting. Like, they can feel in the muscle tissues when those muscles are dehydrated, when they're kind of frayed and just malnourished versus like strong, supple muscles that you can tell this body is well fed and hydrated. You can think of muscles almost kind of like crepe paper or tissue paper. When you're underfueled and underhydrated, those are not going to stretch very well. And I'll have gymnasts that, get injured trying to do, switch halves and switch leaps and things that require a lot of really quick kind of flexibility, not because they weren't warmed up, but because their whole body does not have enough nutrition or hydration to really stay lubricated and soft and as supple as needed for a sport like gymnastics. So this one is very important to address as well. And then, why is your gymnast always injured? I mean, this really takes us back to the recovery gap. And when I teach about injuries, I used to break it down into a couple different categories. And I would say, there's the acute injuries, the accident injuries, the sprains, the strains, the, bone breaks that have nothing to do with nutrition, and they're just unfortunate and they happen. And then there's the overuse injuries that 100% have a lot to do with nutrition, and we need to really focus on those. I've kind of revised my stance on that because, again, hear me out. There will always be accidental injuries that happen, right? The ACL tear, the Achilles tear, the ankle sprain, the concussion. But if we really think about like when a lot of injuries happen, they tend to happen towards the end of practice. They tend to happen towards the end of an event. They tend to happen towards the end of a full routine, right? They tend to happen when a gymnast is tired, when they're fatigued physically, when they're fatigued mentally. And gymnastics is a dangerous sport, let's face it. And we need our gymnasts to have as much brain power as possible to make those split-second decisions to land on their back instead of their neck, or to get the double back, around enough that they don't blow their Achilles tendon, or to get the, double twist around to not blow their ACL. The other really interesting thing that we're seeing in the research right now is, there's so many college gymnasts Achilles tears, and we're trying to figure out like what is going on. Is it the floor? Is it the difficulty? Is it their training schedules? Like, what's going on here? And while they're still trying to investigate and figure out what's going on, they do know that like Stevers and growth plate related injuries from a young age have a correlation to Achilles tears later in their career, arguably when it matters most and what they've worked for their whole career. But we also know that the quality of those tendons at the time of the rupture is not good. So it's not like it just randomly ruptured and this tendon was strong and healthy. Researchers say that in order for it to rupture, there has to be some sort of pathology. Like, there has to be some sort of negative adaptation that has happened to those tendons. And what are tendons made of? They're made of protein. Our body has to have adequate building blocks to repair and recover. And it's not just about enough protein. While that is important, you have to first prioritize adequate overall fueling, or it won't matter how much protein your gymnast is eating. The body will use it for energy instead of going to those tissues to do that repair and recovery work. So if you've had a gymnast that's had any sort of injury, I would always encourage you to look at nutrition, because number one, it could just help them heal faster from those injuries, which, right, who doesn't want that? If they've had any sort of bone related injury, stress fracture, stress reaction, to me, that's always a red flag for underfueling. And I'll say that to parents and they'll be like, oh no, she eats a ton. Like, she eats enough, or, she just, got a stress fracture of her tibia and she's been off for 5 weeks and she's gained some weight. Like she's definitely eating enough. And I'm like, maybe not. First off, if they gain weight when they're off, number one, they're probably just not done growing and developing. But any sort of stress reaction or bone related injury, I'm very much going to question adequacy of nutrition. So why do I talk about all this? Why do I talk about underfueling so much? And why is this so prevalent in the gymnastics world? And it's not just gymnastics, it's our larger culture as well. And we live in what's called diet culture. And I really want to talk about this because I think it's important. And diet culture is a system of beliefs that it worships thinness. It equates it to health and moral virtue, which means most of us will spend our whole lives thinking that we're broken just because we're not that impossibly thin ideal. Or I would argue for gymnasts, they feel like they're inadequate because they don't have the perfect gymnast body, whatever that is. Diet culture leads us to promote weight loss as a means of attaining higher status, which is, in the gymnastics world, focusing on the aesthetic versus performance. And that means you could feel compelled to spend massive amounts of time and energy and money trying to shrink your body, even though the research is very clear that 95 to 97% of people will regain all the lost weight plus some within 6 months to 2 years. And especially when it comes to adolescents, their body is going to fight so hard to maintain normal growth and development that if we over restrict them, we will often see this kind of body fat overshoot that will happen just in response to that starvation. Diet culture demonizes certain ways of eating while elevating others, meaning you're forced to be hypervigilant about your eating, ashamed of making certain food choices, and distracted from your pleasure, your purpose, and your power. Hashtag mom guilt, right? A lot of you sit here and you listen to this and it really connects to you, right? You feel this in your soul. You live in this culture. I live in this culture. You've been oppressed by this for years and you don't want this for your gymnasts. You don't want them to struggle. Some of you listen to this and you're like, okay, I hear you, but I literally don't know why you're telling me this because it has nothing to do with fueling my gymnast. But it does, because there's a more, sneaky form of diet culture that gets in the way of fueling the gymnast, right? It's very insidious. It's things like fear and misinformation about carbohydrates, electrolytes, and the fun foods that aren't appropriate. It's just a misunderstanding of the science and fueling. Diet culture causes fear around body appearance, around growth, around development, right? We're so worried about keeping gymnasts small or not letting them grow anymore. Once they go through puberty, we think they're done and don't want them to gain any more weight, that we're more worried about that in their bodies than we are their performance and their health. Diet culture leads to a lot of misinformation about like heaviness and telling gymnasts that they're too heavy and they're too heavy to do certain skills. I've had so many gymnasts I've worked with that, coaches have literally told them, if you were lighter, you would double flip better, or you would vault better, or bars would be easier. And every time we work together and we optimize their nutrition, their performance improves regardless of if they lose weight or not. And then the coaches are like, oh, you must have lost weight, you're vaulting better. And it's like, no, they're just finally properly fueled instead of running on empty, trying to ask their body to do all this crazy stuff. Ultimately, this really comes from good intentions, right? We all want our gymnasts to be healthy. We want them to be disease-free. We want them to, have longevity, not just in the sport and in life. But often the messages we get about food and fueling lead to restriction and deprivation, which can then cause overeating, food sneaking, or even binging. And that is what will cause a problem. Like that is what will cause the weight dysregulation, the food and body struggles, and that can very much get in the way of your gymnast performance, not just during the sport, but the rest of her life. So again, some of you already are like, I don't care what my gymnast weighs. She has a totally healthy relationship with food in her body. Like, I'm not sure why you're talking about this. There's an even sneakier form of diet culture called wellness culture. And this is what I see much more prevalently in the sport of gymnastics. And this is a sneaky modern way of dieting that is supposedly about wellness, right? Everyone says, I'm not dieting. It's about my health. It's a lifestyle change. No, it's not. It's still a diet. This would be things like clean eating, detoxes and cleanses, inappropriate fears of certain things like gluten or grains or sugar when you don't have a legitimate medical condition. All the time, I see chiropractors and naturopaths and even physical therapists tell gymnasts to, oh, well, cut out the gluten, cut out the dairy if you're sore. It just means you have a lot of inflammation. And it's like, no, They have a lot of inflammation because they're under fuel, because under fueling is literally starvation to the body, which leads to inflammation, and they're tired and they're sore because their body doesn't have the building blocks to recover. Like, it's not the gluten and dairy. If it is, okay, cool. Like, we'll deal with that. But we first have to correct the under fueling before we even try to investigate if that could be something that is contributing. Wellness culture will demonize certain foods, which for a lot of parents, you have a lot of guilt, right? You have a lot of guilt that you stop at fast food on the way home from gym, or you use, packaged processed foods, heaven forbid, because y'all are so busy, right? You got to feed yourself. You got to feed your gymnast. Most of you guys are never home for dinner because your gymnast is at the gym and you're running kids to and from. Not to mention, you have other children, right, that probably do other sports, of course, whose schedules are completely opposite and are across town. And that can really make feeding a challenge and can make you very resentful and make you feel really frustrated when we first focus on the big rocks, right? We focus on adequacy, which can look like a lot of different things for a lot of different families. And unfortunately, this over focus on clean eating and perfect eating can lead to some disordered eating. It can lead to something called orthorexia, where all of a sudden now your gymnast, has to eat perfectly, and she's obsessed with healthy eating to the point that she'll make decisions to choose not to fuel herself that are not appropriate. I'm not saying that nutrition doesn't matter. I'm not saying that healthy eating and nutrient-dense foods don't matter. Of course they do, but adequacy is first and foremost. But some of you are still stuck on this whole inflammation thing. And you're like, no, I don't buy it. Like, I'm not getting my gymnast sugar. I'm not allowing her to have this. Like, it's going to cause inflammation. It's going to cause her to perform poorly. Here's something that's very interesting that I only learned in the last couple of years. This is called the social determinants of health, where essentially researchers have looked at thousands and thousands of people trying to figure out, what contributes to someone's risk of disease and death. Because that's really what it boils down to, right? We're all trying to eat healthy. We're all trying to exercise. We're all trying to take care of our bodies because we don't want diabetes, and we don't want Alzheimer's, and we don't want heart disease, and we don't want kidney disease, and we don't want all of these things that the diet industry promises us will be prevented if we just eat the right balance of foods and exercise the right way, whatever that is. But here's the deal. We know from this research called the social determinants of health that no one food or meal actually has a direct impact on our health. We have to look at it as a sum of parts, right? It's about your access to medical care. It's about your physical environment, your family support, your community support, your economic status. All of that stuff actually makes up 70% of someone's risk of developing a disease or early death. And none of those things have to do with food. And one very important part of that is something called your ACE score, or adverse childhood events. Any sort of trauma, any sort of divorce, adoption, really, critical medical condition, or, family medical crisis, abuse, physical, emotional, whatever, can all increase someone's ACE score, which is directly related to their development of disease. So when I work with high-level gymnasts that, have had trauma from eating, and they've been body shamed and all this other stuff, it would be inappropriate for me to come at them and say, well, you just need to eat clean, and here's your diet plan, and comply or die. Like, no, that would be totally inappropriate. We first need to address what's going on, right? When I work with, a gymnast who has a medical condition like ADHD, and they're dealing with the medication side effects and, all of these challenges, it's not my first priority to try to get them to eat the most healthy, perfect, clean diet. The first thing we need to do is work with the medication and the appetite issues. We need to get them fed properly, not mess around with cutting out gluten and dairy if that's not warranted, especially when that's going to make it even more challenging to get them adequately fed in the first place. I'm not saying that there's not a time and place for what we call medical nutrition therapy. Absolutely, right? If someone has celiac, they need to avoid gluten. If someone, has an upset stomach when they consume dairy, there are other options. But just blindly eliminating certain foods or telling your gymnast they can't have them is more than likely going to lead to them struggling even more with underfueling, and it's only going to exacerbate the issue. I bring up clean eating, which probably steps on some toes, but look, I used to do it. I used to promote it. I used to eat clean. That's what I would have told you like 6 or 7 years ago when I first started as a dietitian. but it doesn't work in the long term. And it often creates a lot of restriction and deprivation, which can lead to overeating and food obsession and food sneaking. And cleaning doesn't guarantee anything, right? It's arbitrary, first off. But secondly, you can eat clean, you can undereat, which is what happens to most gymnasts when they're training 20 plus hours a week. You can eat clean and overeat, which is why probably many of us have been on different diets throughout the years and we didn't lose a single pound, even though we cleaned out our pantry and did all this stuff to eat clean. You can eat clean and maybe eat enough, but it's not the proper amount of carbs and protein and fats to support high level training. And like I said, I'm very interested in the behavioral aspect of food because that's what we overlook. It's really easy for some guru to tell you to eat clean and only feed your kid whole unprocessed foods. But it's a whole other issue to actually attend to what's going on behaviorally. And while maybe they're younger and you have a lot more control over what they eat, at some point, they're going to have their driver's license and they're going to go to college. And if you have over controlled them, they're going to go crazy. And I work with a lot of high level gymnasts that literally just out of defiance and rebellion and restriction are overeating, are food sneaking, are eating things that they don't really actually enjoy or make them feel good, all because they weren't allowed when they were younger. It's not a free for all. Okay. So I'm not saying that every single day we should be eating soda and cookies and candy and junk food and all this stuff, but we want to find this balance that allows our gymnasts to be fueled, but also be satisfied so that when they are on their own or when they are at the birthday party, they don't have the need to eat 10 cookies out of FOMO, right? They know they're going to be there. They can be choosy and decide even if they like it or not, and they can listen to their bodies, but that cannot happen if they are first not fed adequately. And secondly, if we don't have a good balance of food in the home. So let's break down this whole concept of unintentional underfueling some more. Let's pretend you have like a 9-year-old level 5 gymnast trains maybe 12, 15 hours a week, maybe 20 hours a week, especially if they're like going to skip to level 7 or maybe elite track. At this point in their journey, you're probably feeding them 3 meals a day. You're feeding them some snacks. If they're hungry, you give them food. But if we look at what they're taking in versus their calculated needs, they're probably just barely eating enough. So I'm going to put them in the green. Then your gymnast is all of a sudden maybe 11, 12, 13, she's level 8, and now we're training 20, 25 hours a week, and it's a lot more intense, looking at the practice. As a parent, you're probably still feeding the same 3 meals, some snacks. Obviously, you feed her when she's hungry, but if we look at what she's eating compared to what she needs, yellow zone, like it's not enough. We have a recovery gap. Then fast forward to maybe 14 years old, level 10, training 20, 25, 30 hours a week, a lot more intense. Same thing, probably 3 meals, couple snacks, but now add in puberty, add in social media, add in body consciousness and weird food rules and trends that they see on TikTok. And all of a sudden we are in the red. Like we are either unintentionally underfueling and not meeting our needs, or that's also coupled with some intentional restriction because of food and body struggles. Regardless, they have now developed REDS, or relative energy deficiency in sport, which is going to affect every system in the body in a negative way. So what does this look like? What does unintentional underfueling look like? It's the gymnast who's not growing well. It's the gymnast who you feel like maybe is obsessed with sugar and carbs and chips or whatever you don't want them to eat. It's the gymnast who is always tired or always sore or just has like little nagging injuries or even big injuries that aren't healing well. It's the gymnast who isn't developing. So they haven't started their period by 15 or 16. They don't have breast development by 12 or 13 years old. And it might even be the gymnast who food sneaks or hides food. All of these are kind of yellow, red flags for you to kind of perk up and pay attention and recognize that they are likely not getting enough nutrition, even if you think that they're getting a lot. Why does this matter? Why are we spending a whole day to talk about the effects of underfueling? Because number one, it will lead to poor growth and development, which if you're not growing and developing, you can't repair and recover, can't have your cake and eat it too. We got to have both. And this is going to increase the risk of injury, which I'm telling you, this will happen when it matters the most. Most of the gymnasts, upper level gymnasts that want to work with us one-on-one do not come to us until they've had a major injury and a major setback, that if you look through their history and their fueling history and their training history, it could have been prevented. The back stress fracture, the tibia stress fracture, a lot of these things could have been prevented with adequate fueling from the get-go. Underfueling also leads to increased risk of future body image concerns. Supporting your gymnast and fueling her through puberty is going to make that a lot steadier of a transition. What happens for most gymnasts is they're unintentionally underfueled. So they're not growing, they're not developing as they should. And then a major injury happens, or heaven forbid, COVID quarantine happens. And all of a sudden they grow a ton of inches, gain a ton of weight in a very short period of time. And while that's totally normal and necessary, needed to happen, it's very distressing, right? It throws off the mechanics. It makes it difficult. Now they're struggling. And you could have prevented some of that by helping them to fuel and helping that take a much more steady progression of development. We also know that underfueling can lead to future risk of disordered eating. So chronic underfueling can lead to changes in the brain and make someone more likely to develop something like anorexia. So it's definitely not something to mess around with. And what most parents and coaches don't know is that a gymnast can be underfueled at any weight. So you can't just look at your gymnast and say, oh, she weighs plenty. Like she looks fine. She's probably eating too much. You don't know that. And the really crazy thing is that chronic underfueling will actually lead to negative body composition adaptations. Those who eat the most will be the leanest, within their needs. I show this graphic almost every talk I give and to all the clients I work with because it's so profound. This shows the effects on an athlete's health when they're underfueled and have RED-S, and the effects on their performance. And I encourage you, if you're watching the replay with your gymnast, have your gymnast look at this. The crazy thing is that underfueling affects every system in the body, causes anemia, slowed growth and development, can increase psychological struggles like depression, anxiety, OCD. It affects the heart, it affects the GI tract, your immune system, menstrual function, bone health, your thyroid, your metabolism. It affects all of those in a negative way. In terms of performance, it's everything you don't want: decreased concentration, irritability, increased depression, anxiety, decreased muscle strength, decreased endurance, increased injury risk, decreased training response, right? Maybe your gymnast isn't tired or sore, but maybe she's just not progressing as quickly as she used to, or as quickly as maybe she could, that you don't know. You don't know what you don't know, right? Can lead to impaired judgment, decreased coordination. So not only is this a threat to your gymnast's health and longevity in the sport, this is also a threat to her safety in the gym, which is really, really important. So we don't have time to really dive into that anymore, but I do want to wrap up with a couple case studies. So Rachel, which these are real gymnasts, okay, I didn't make these up, but they're de-identified, okay, because of HIPAA. But Rachel was a level 10 elite that came to us tired of being injured every single season. Her mom was very knowledgeable in nutrition. She cooked really healthfully, and she had her taking a ton of supplements that were known to help with muscle soreness and inflammation. The supplements didn't work though. Why? Because she was underfueled. Okay. All the omega-3s, all the turmeric, all the, vitamin D and iron, and all of these supplements that are very, backed by the research and can strategically be used to kind of get that last 1-2%, aren't going to do what they need to do if your athlete is chronically underfueled. And I think for a lot of parents, this gives kind of a false sense of security. Kristen was a level 8 gymnast who was tired all the time. She struggled to make it through full routines. She really lacked power on vault, to the point that our mom took her to the pediatrician, and they checked for mono. They checked for all the things. They couldn't figure out what was going on and why she was tired. Coincidentally, mom had made the whole family vegetarian because she had read a ton of plant-based sports nutrition books and thought that that was the best way to feed them. But actually, come to find out, it just wasn't giving her what she needed. And she just didn't get enough nutrition day in, day out. It's not to say that your gymnast can't be vegetarian or vegan. She absolutely can, but it's definitely going to take some attention and intentional planning to make sure they're getting what they need to be successful. Allison was a level 6 gymnast who was kind of on the fast track, in the gym. So she trained 25 hours a week, which is a lot at that age. And she was doing amazingly, right? Like she was the kid that the coach could tell them, throw this, throw that, do this. And she was game for anything. But then she developed a stress fracture in her tibia. And unfortunately, the recovery took a long time. It took way longer than it should have. And even after months of PT, she still didn't feel normal, to the point that she missed almost entire season. Her mom was having to pick her up early from practice. And when we first sat down and looked at her nutrition, mom fed her super healthfully. So if any doctor or someone had asked, how's your nutrition? She would have said, oh, well, we eat this, this, and this. And someone would have said, well, that's great. That sounds perfect. That can't be the problem. Well, it wasn't about healthy. It was about underfueling. And that really was the issue. And it was amazing within a pretty short period of time with proper fueling and performance nutrition layered in there. She got back to her old self and is now doing amazingly. So it's really easy to get stuck in the weeds and kind of lose sight of what matters most in terms of fueling the gymnast. So your homework for the next couple of days is what we call our kind of wellness and performance tracker. So this is a page in your worksheet, which you have that in your email, in your workbook. We have it in the Facebook group. But this is a really helpful tool to allow your gymnast to start doing some introspection and start checking in with her body and how she's feeling. Again, this is not for a grade. This is not pass fail. You do not have to turn this into me. This is just something to help your gymnast start thinking about, and for you guys to start having some conversations about different aspects of wellness and workload that we've talked about today. So there are several different categories on here. For breakfast, you just answer yes or no, which at this point, you don't know what is an adequate breakfast or not. We don't have time to get into that during the challenge, but we'll just start with whether they're eating or not. And I would say if they were only grabbing a granola bar, that's a no. Like, we need to have at least a couple food groups there for it to be kind of a full breakfast. Performance nutrition. Do they have nutrition and hydration before, during, and after training? Again, we don't have time to go into the specifics of that. That's something we'll talk more about at the end of this week, of kind of an opportunity to learn more. But a lot of gymnasts we work with have never fueled their workouts. For years, they've trained for 4+ hours a day with just water, if even that. And if that's the case, they're missing out on a huge aspects of performance in their training sessions. Hours of sleep, I would just put the number of hours they get. Again, 8 to 9 is kind of that minimum. If your gymnast is younger, they probably need 10, if not more. And the timing of sleep is also really important. We know that from like 10 or 11 p.m. to 6 or 7 a.m. is like the best window of sleep. So if your gymnast is staying up till 1 a.m. and sleeping in till whatever time, ends up being 8 hours, that's not the same quality sleep that she would have had if she'd gotten in bed at a more normal time. For fatigue, I would say, for energy at the gym, that's a 1 to 10 rating. So 1 is no power, I'm slow, I'm sluggish. And then 10 is I feel awesome, I've got all the energy. This one's really interesting because your gymnast doesn't know what she doesn't know. So she may tell you, oh, well, my energy is like at an 8, like I was fine. Yet when she implements proper performance nutrition, she then might figure out, oh, it actually wasn't at an 8, because now I feel way better. And I've had gymnasts do that. I've had gymnasts where we've implemented performance nutrition. I know they're eating enough. And I'll say, well, how are you feeling? Are you feeling better at gym? How's your energy? How's your focus? And they're like, I don't know. It's not really working. Like, I don't feel bad, but I don't feel better. But then they don't do their performance nutrition. They forget their snacks. And that's when they're like, oh, that actually was helping. And I actually did feel a lot better, because then when I didn't have my snacks, I did not feel good. For fatigue, that's also a 1 through 10 rating. So 1 is not tired at all, 10 is totally exhausted. And then soreness, and fatigue can be also at gym, but throughout the day as well. And then soreness can be a 1 through 10, 1 kind of not sore at all, 10, so sore, can't even move, which, any of these 3 right here are going to be interesting to see what your gymnast says. So your action step for today and every day the rest of this week is to do this chart with your gymnast. I think it's a great conversation starter, and it will probably give the both of you some insight into how they're doing with their nutrition. So finish the quiz from yesterday if you haven't already, or if you've done it but your gymnast hasn't had a chance to take it. They can easily do it on their phone on the way home. Like, it doesn't take long. Use the wellness tracker for the next 3 days. We'll talk more about this on day 4, because at that point you'll have at least Tuesday and Wednesdays information in there. And then that's it for today. So if you guys have any questions, feel free to put them in the chat. I know we had a question earlier. Someone asked, a really good one. What's the difference between growing pains and soreness? That's a really tough one. And I would say it's probably just a process of elimination where, if we know that your gymnast is getting enough nutrition day in, day out to close that recovery gap, if we have optimized their performance nutrition strategy based on how much they're training, the intensity, duration of their training, if we've done everything we can from that standpoint, if we've checked labs, if they're growing, and then they're still having kind of growing pains, that's when I would say that just may be due to rapid growth, and there's not a whole lot we can do about that other than just kind of support them. Someone asked, what about issues like Sievers and Osgood-Schlatters? Yes, great question. So this is one I've only learned more about in the last couple of years, but those growth plate injuries or inflammation can also be related to underfueling, because during puberty, the first thing that happens is the bones get long, they grow longer, but their mineralization has not had a chance to catch up. And there's also changes that can happen with the growth plates, just making them more at risk for inflammation. So again, we can't, fix everything with nutrition, but I think we at least optimize as much as we can and then see the effects on that. And I'll say we worked with a lot of gymnasts that had stuff like Sievers or Osgood-Schlatters. And then when they finally get their nutrition in check, like they no longer have these chronic issues. At the same time, I love pediatricians, but I love physical therapists. I'm a huge fan of Dave Tilley with Shift Movement Science, and he has a lot of really good information. Anytime I have a gymnast with those conditions or shin splints, I love to send them to a PT who understands gymnastics to say, look, do we have something mechanical going on? Are they running in a way that's, putting extra stress? Are their calf muscles tight? Or I've actually had gymnasts where they just don't have enough muscle mass to really support the joints. I had a level 9 I worked with really bad shin splints, which again, everyone's like, it's just the pounding, kind of like Sievers, like just deal with it, kind of comes and goes. And I sent her to Dave and he was like, no, like her body literally just does not have enough muscles and tissues to really support those bones. So by helping her catch up with growth and fuel properly, she's not had shin splint issues in like over a year, which is amazing. Someone asked, can underfueling cause mental blocks? So I wouldn't say that it necessarily causes it, but I would say it absolutely can exacerbate it, because the brain uses a lot of nutrition. I mean, the brain relies on 130 grams of carbohydrate a day by itself. And so if you think about it, if your kid's not eating enough to support as much as they're training, the brain's not going to have enough fuel to do that higher order kind of mood and emotion regulation, which would definitely be involved in that kind of mental aspect of the gym. And I've definitely seen gymnasts with very much worsened anxiety, depression, mental blocks, all because they're underfueled. And even when it's something very clinical like depression or anxiety or OCD, any therapist who's familiar with this kind of stuff will tell you, the brain has to be fueled for them to do the work in therapy. So again, like if you're going to pay for them to do mental coaching, if you're going to pay for them to work with a therapist or psychologist, like at least make sure they're eating enough so that they can do their best work and get the best effects of the training. I can say when I was a gymnast, I broke my back freshman years on bars, and it was never the same. I had a horrible mental block after that. There weren't like mental coaches back in the day, like there weren't sports dietitians available. And I also was underfueling and was struggling with food in my body. And every single day I cried on bars. And if you know me, like I'm not a crier. It takes a lot to get me to cry. I didn't cry at my wedding. But because I was so underfueled, like I was just a mess. And I'm sure it annoyed my coach and he had no idea what to do with me. But looking back, like it's no wonder, like my poor brain just didn't have the energy it needed to even deal with those mental blocks. Someone said, what are the labs you recommend getting checked? So definitely full iron panel and vitamin D. It's something we have in our course and also in all of our programs for parents. So if I know we have a couple course members on here that just want a refresher, definitely go check out module 5 on injuries, inflammation, or certainly you can post something in our course member Facebook group. Someone says, I'm already convinced that underfueling is a problem for us. Can't wait for day 4. Do you have any quick tips of what we can implement today? So yes, we are currently enrolling for our group coaching for level 5, 6 through 10 gymnasts. So if you know that this is an issue and you want support, feel free to shoot me an email, shoot me a DM, send me a Facebook message, and I'll be more than happy to talk with you about kind of next steps and how you could get some support there. If you're lower level than that, we have our online course for parents, which again, I can share more, so feel free to message me and we'll talk more as a group towards the end this week. Someone said, how do I know if our daughter is underfueling and that's why they're not growing or hitting puberty, or if it's just normal. My 13-year-old has not started any signs of puberty, but is also a late bloomer. Super great question. So unfortunately, we don't have time to get into that in the preseason challenge. It's something I go super in depth in our online programs for parents. But essentially we look at a couple things. Number one, we look at growth charts because they typically tell a story and give us a good idea of whether or not a gymnast is kind of following their own curve and trajectory. I'll say there's some caveats there because their growth chart as a gymnast is going to look different than a normal kid their age, because they're going to have a lot more muscle mass than, let's say they had a twin sibling that wasn't a gymnast. Yes, it's important to take family history into consideration, but also thinking back, like, if mom didn't start her period till late, like, was she also an athlete? Like, was she also underfueled, or was that just genetically normal? If they're not showing any signs of puberty by like 13, I would say that's definitely when you want to talk with your pediatrician. You might need a referral to an endocrinologist. There are, conditions like medical conditions that can lead to delayed puberty. We do see like growth hormone deficiency and some things like that, come through our practice. But even in those cases, it's the unintentional underfueling that is at play. And I would say if your gymnast is training like 20 plus hours a week, more than likely she's probably not eating enough. And it's at least worth, having a nutrition assessment and seeing where she's at, because that's also going to make any other kind of medical investigation that much more effective. And I used to work in pediatric endocrinology, and I worked hand in hand with the doctors. We would get referrals for poor growth, for delayed puberty, and they would always send the patient to me for a nutrition assessment because they wanted to know, is this a nutrition issue? Is it not? Because that's a really important part of their kind of diagnostic workup. So super, super great questions. Y'all are awesome. You had so many awesome questions today. I hope you've learned a ton. If you think of questions later, or you have any interesting revelations from the workload and fueling tracker, feel free to share them in the group. Would love to see and hear kind of what you're experiencing with your gymnast. And then tomorrow we will be back for day 3. So with that, loved having you guys. So pumped for day 3, and I'll talk to you later. Bye for now.